Hey students, hope you're doing well. This is the second video for this week on the Folktale, Grimm Folktale and Your Own Folktale challenge. I started to talk about the Goose Girl in the last video, and if you turn to page 680 in your textbook, just before the story starts, you'll see a list in your textbook compiled by Otto Rank, who was a famous psychologist of the day, and you can see he has worked out that this is a very much a type of story that is common to a lot of stories, and you've got a list here of the things that happen in the story that are common elements of a lot of stories. 1, the child is separated from her natural mother. 2, the mother tries to provide surrogate protection, and so on, all the way down to the final step in which the child or the princess assumes her rightful place in society. And you can kind of feel that the contour of the story seems to be something that we recognize. It feels like one of the Disney adaptations, with the princess being misplaced, somebody stealing her identity and then having to right the world and put everything back in place. We've heard those stories before. What I'd like you to do for The Raven, which is the second story, which also feels like it is a common story with a lot of recognizable elements. I'm sure when you read it, you probably could draw some comparisons to Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, Rapunzel. It's definitely a story, a questing story in which there's a damsel in distress, and a prince has to rescue that damsel, and that is something that we've run into a lot in various stories of our youth. So it's probably recognizable. What I'd like you to do, instead of signing in on this particular video, I would like you in the comments section to just write a response paragraph to this story, and you can talk about what type of story it is and what elements are in the story that you feel are sort of borrowed or shifted around from other similar stories. But also, I would like you to respond on the following elements. What I was going to do in class is have this story read and then have you sort of respond in real time to these following elements, but you can do it on your own. So read back the story, pause the video if you like, and read back the story. And then in the comments, maybe address some of these elements. First of all, what is the problem and solution given in the story? Is there one? Do you feel like there's a setup of some sort of moral lesson that involves a problem that has to resolve? What are the cultural elements of the story? How is it different from our time? Does it feel like an 18th century story, or do you feel like it has a sort of timeless element to it? What about the magical devices in the story? Magic just happens in these stories, and it's never explained. It's just sort of accepted as a part of the normal world. But there are some sort of weird elements to the magic in these stories as well, and I wonder what you make of it. Where do these powers come from? Why are they only given to certain people? Why are they only effective in certain situations? Moral element. What is the moral overtone of the story? What do you think it's trying to teach? I guess that sort of relates to the problem solution, but perhaps you can separate a comment out there. The human characters, again, are sort of flat, not well drawn. You just have basically a princess, then you have a hero that is supposed to save her. You have various flat characters throughout the story: a giant, some robbers, an old lady who appears to be a witch type figure. Maybe comment on that, and the non-human characters as well. In all of the stories that you read for today, there are various animal characters. Falada in the first story, the horse, In the second story, of course, the story is called the ravens. So maybe comment on that. I'm not looking for any specific answers. I'm hoping what will happen is you'll read each other's comments, and maybe we can start some sort of discussion in the comment section. I will try to reply to people as well, but I'm not looking for anything particular. I'm just looking for your immediate response to the story, and I'm giving you some guidelines on things that you can touch on. Now, when it comes to the task for today, I am sending you a document both in a message and also in the announcement section on the front page of the course in D2L, which I'm starting to do now. And this document is probably 5-6 pages long. The first page is what I want you to copy and paste to a message to me. If you can't copy from the PDF for some reason, then just recreate the correct questions and answer them. So what you have, if you'll open that document now, you don't have to print it out. If you can look at it on your screen, you'll see page 1 is the actual assignment. Now, what I asked you to do for the task this week is to find a folktale, any folktale from any tradition, from any part of history, as long as it sort of is an original text folktale and not an adaptation or a novel or something like that. Find any folktale, and if you for some reason haven't been able to find one or don't have time to look around, you may use the third story from today's reading assignment, which is Father John. You can use that one. But do this assignment. Of course, I don't want you to send me the story. All right, I just want you to answer these questions about them. But first I have to kind of explain what's going on. There are two people to tell you about before you look at this document. One is Joseph Campbell, who we're going to go into detail with later in the semester because he has a huge presence in studying mythology. 20th century comparative mythology and religion expert. Loved to study common elements of stories and myths in something that he called the monomyth. In other words, he thought that stories all over the world, mythologies all over the world, could be compressed into sort of single elements. The second person is a 19th century Russian folklorist and philologist named Alexander Prop. And he broke down stories into what he called morphemes, which are analyzable chunks of stories, and identified 3 narrative units that are common to all stories. And I've given you in this document, let's see, on the second page you'll find Joseph Campbell's types of folklore. He has 5 types of folklore tales, loosely. And then you have Vladimir Prop's 7 abstract character functions, and then followed by his 31 wonder tale function sequences. So the question, you can look through those and see how they apply to your story. The first question, of course, once you've identified your story where you found it, the first question is which of Campbell's types best fit your story. So all you have to do is list the numbers, the corresponding numbers from that list. What fits your story. Make a list. The second question is make a list of the main symbols in the story with their possible meaning. So you can make a list of physical symbols and give me your take on what you think they symbolize. Third question, how many of Prop's abstract character functions are represented? So maybe you have 2 or 3 characters in your story, and some of those you can just print the corresponding numbers. Which of those reflect the characters in your story? And question 4, list all the function sequences that can be found. So there is a chapter in the book, it's a couple of chapters before the Grimm chapter, which goes over Vladimir Prop's morphemes in detail. So if you want more information on him, or you're just interested, he's a very fascinating scholar, you can look at that and get more of an idea of what he's doing. But I thought to make it simple and just to give you a list of the 31 sequences, and then you can decide which apply to your story. So again, you can list the corresponding numbers. And lastly, number 5, which is really interesting to me, what illogical elements did you come across in your story? These stories can be very simplistic, and most or 90% of the story is easy to interpret and apply meaning to, but there's always one or two strange elements in these stories that it's just hard to make sense of. And I'm wondering what came up in your story. Oddities, weirdness. I've mentioned a couple in the Goose Girl. The fact that the princess has power over the wind to control Conrad, the wayward boy, but she has no control over her servant. Or the complete uselessness or seeming uselessness of the magical object that she's being given at the beginning of the story. It doesn't seem to come into play, or maybe it does. Maybe you think it does, but things like that, just oddities in your particular stories, I'm interested to find. So that's all you have to send for your task this week. You don't have to send the story itself or a copy of the story. Just this first page on the document that I'm sending you, either copy and paste it to a message and fill it out, or just reproduce the questions and fill it out in a message to me, and then you will get all the points for this week's task. And then the second thing, of course, is just this video, on the YouTube video, give me a response to that second story, The Ravens, based on some of the elements that I laid out for you, or any other thoughts that you have. And maybe as the comments build up, just look at some of the other comments that are coming in from other students, and feel free to reply or start some sort of conversation. I'm kind of hoping that happens naturally as we put these videos out. I'm going to force you to do it when we get to the second paper, so maybe now's a good time to practice. So make sure that you do those two elements so that I can firstly mark you present for this week's classes. You'll need to do the in-class activity, which is responding to that second story. And then of course there's the task, which you have a exercise sheet to fill out and send back to me. If you would, please just copy that to a message, or you can put it in the I made a little section in D2L where you can send assignments. I think it's just called assignments. Either one of those is fine, but if you can just copy the questions and then put it in the actual text of the message, it's just easier than having to open 45 different Word docs or PDF docs. So if you can do that, it would be very helpful. As always, get back to me with any questions and concerns. I'll try to answer all of them. Have fun studying this stuff this week. It's very interesting. I wish we had more time in real time to discuss this and get your immediate reactions. But I'm looking forward to what you come up with, and what stories you chose, and what happens in those stories, and what you make of the common elements in those stories. This will be the only 2 videos this week, and then I'll be back with videos on the Arthurian legends next week. See you then.